Hello and welcome to Kirkwall in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And in front of us on the tarmac we've got the Citation CJ4, the working title mod. And yeah, so usually I'm in X-Plane, but I'm back in Flight Sim 2020 again. The recent sort of updates with the UK World update, scenery updates, and the fixes for some of the performance issues have meant it's actually really nice environment to fly in the UK now with the the scenery and the weather and stuff. So the issue's always been the aircraft. Some good GA planes. There's nothing, no decent turboprops or anything like that. I've never really been a big fan of jets, but I have to say that this working title CJ4 has kind of changed my mind a bit, and it's really good fun to fly, and they've implemented the sort of FMS and navigation side of it really well, the working title team. And it's actually a very, very versatile aircraft, and so I thought I'd sort of try and fly it on one of the routes in Scotland that I'd normally use a different type of plane on. Going to do FMS and a DME arc here today. It's a relatively short flight. We're going to go to Inverness, and yeah, so we shall see how it goes. So just while I'm in drone view here, let me just see if I can get inside the cabin. So we've got something for an inside cabin view. No, I'm probably going to muck this up. I can't remember what all the keys are. Oops, that's not going to work very well. Might have to sort of put up with it being slightly wonky for now. Yeah, okay. I can't figure out how to get it to go up a small amount, but maybe we'll try that later when we're in the flight. Anyway, let's jump back into the cabin. So, we shall get the power on, and then we'll have a look. Or let's have a look at the route first. So, if I will have a look on a Navigraph. So we are up here in Kirkwall. We're going to follow airway N560 via Wick to Bombay, and then we're going to approach Inverness, and we're going to take the DME arc arrival for runway 05. You just double check that the weather, you can't really get ATIS for Kirkwall in the game, so let's just have a quick look on little nav map. Yeah, so the wind at the moment is mainly from the south, at least it is in Kirkwall, 154, 5 knots. So we'll take off runway 09. Then in terms of Inverness, you won't see this, but if I hover over it, variable 3 knots, yeah, okay, we can land on runway 05. That's fine. Right, so we'll arm the emergency lights and we'll turn on the battery. I'm not going to make this a tutorial. I'm just going to go through the procedures that are needed for the actual flight. We'll get the avionics in dispatch mode. We'll get the standby flight display on. FMS will nag us about initializing position, so pausing it. There we go. Now, yeah, I see another thing that's always put me off more complex type of airliner type things is the FMSs, which always seem to have an awful lot of setting up to do. There's a little bit of setting up to do on this one, but it's not bad at all. Let me just cancel that warning. That's just for fuel pressure and oil pressure, which obviously we haven't got because the engines aren't running at the moment. We'll run on batteries in this dispatch mode until we get the flight plan, and then we'll start one of the engines. So if we go flight plan, going from EGPA to EGPE. 92 miles, which is fine, and so we want to go N560 airway. The N560 starts at the Kirkwall end at a waypoint called Cockpit, so we shall put that in. So we essentially from the runway We're going to go there, and as that's kind of co-located with the airport, it should just transition past that. If we go to the next page, we can then put our airway in. This is nice as well, N560, instead of having to put all the individual waypoints in. And the end point where we're going to begin the approach is a waypoint called Bombay at Bona Bridge. And then we need, so we'll exec that, and then we'll do our departure and arrival. We're going to depart on runway 09, and for the arrival we'll put that in now just because I want to pre-plan it. I mean, normally if it was a longer flight, you wouldn't put the arrival in until you were near the destination and you got ATIS or talk to ATC, but we're going to do the ILS 05. Now just show you on Navigraph what the arrival looks like. So we are going to do the DME arc arrival. So we're arriving up here on airway N560 from Bombay. So we're coming in here, we get to 14 miles out and we turn onto the 12-mile arc all the way around to this point here where we turn in for the final approach on the ILS. Now you'll notice there's a couple of, there's obviously with the arc you've got where you start to turn, you've got the initial point of the arc, and there's a couple of intermediate points here. There's this one here which has got an altitude check on it, 3,500, and then you've got the point here 244 degrees where you turn in, and another altitude check. Now the plane can't fly DME arcs. That is the one limitation of, well, it's one limitation of the FMS's navigation system at the moment. So if we were to go to the flight plan overview mode, which I've got on a preset here, and we were to step through the waypoints in the flight plan, you'll see that we'll get to Bombay. Well, in fact, we've got a discontinuity at the moment, so let's sort that out. It's basically just going to go from Bombay directly to the sort of initial approach point, or the initial approach fix. So it's not going to do the arc. In fact, we haven't put, that's partly as well because we have, did we put the arrival in? Hang on, we haven't, we seem to have missed, we seem to be missing our, yeah, I don't think we've got the arrival in, have we? Sorry, let's just, we didn't do that, let's just put the arrival. Okay, I've got the Navigraph data installed in FS 2020, so if you've got a Navigraph subscription, there's a beta install for FS 2020, run that. It is definitely superior to the built-in data. It probably doesn't matter for most things, but for some of these sort of DME type VOR approaches, certainly in Scotland, that there are more waypoints and more approaches known to with the Navigraph data. In this case, we go for the Bombay transition. You should see that will add. So what that's added is the turning point on the arc and the initial point on the arc. If we go back to MFD advance again and go through the waypoints. Yeah, and it's also added a spurious waypoint, so it's obviously not always correct. It's added one next 1,000 nautical miles away. Let's just delete that. It's always worth stepping through and checking your flight plan. And we'll get rid of this discontinuity as well. We'll use that. There we go. Now you can see, if we go back here, well, we've just missed out the arc part. Now, if you remember, I said there's a couple of intermediate points on the arc, 306 degrees and 244 degrees. Well, if we look in little nav map, you can actually see that those waypoints are in the Navigraph database already, D306L, so that's 306 bearing from Inverness, and L is the 12th letter of the Alpes, that's 12 miles out, and D244L are actually available for us to enter as entries in the legs page. So we'll do that just to give it some intermediate points, and so when it comes to VNAV, where the plane will do the step down in altitude for us, it will have more accurate VNAV points. If you don't have Navigraph, you can put in those waypoints using custom waypoint notation. So for example, the 306 bearing from Inverness at 12 miles out, you could put INS, which is the name of the fix, it's the Inverness VOR, 306, and then the distance, which was 12. You could put that in and insert it between D340 and CI05. And you're also the same Inverness 244/12. But since we've got waypoints already, I won't bother doing that. I'm going to put D306L in here. And let's put that in after 340, but before the final approach fix. And make sure we pick the right one, the one at 57 degrees north. Double check that it's a sensible distance, which is great. And then I'm going to put D244L for where we start to turn off of the arc onto the final approach. And again, there's more than one. We don't want, they're not actually in closest position order either. D59 degrees north, way too far north. 57 is the one we want. Okay, so now those look good. We can put in the altitude restrictions. So we've got 3,500 feet for the first extra point we put in, the D306L. And the next one's 27. Well, that's covered by the fact we want to be at 27 at the end of it. So in fact, let's get to 27 at the end of the arc. Just give ourselves more time rather than being at the final approach at 2700. Okay, great. I'm going to exact that. And now, if we just one more have a look at the waypoints, you should see we've got, it's not an arc, but it's more of an arc. It's enough positions for the VNAV to work out all our altitudes, hopefully. Or we shall see anyway. Cool, so I'm going to switch back to, I've got memories, so I've got flight plan mode in this one, I've got present position mode in this one. Alright, after flight plan, the only other thing you really have to do is perf. So we'll get our weight balanced. So we're pretty loaded up. We've got 50% fuel, which is way more than we need. We've got a full set of passengers. We come to 6,723 kilograms. That's the only figure you need. You can put in passengers and cargo in here. I find it easy just to take the total reported weight and put it in as the gross weight. Fuel is sensed anyway. Cruise altitude today, the maximum height for that airway is 19 flight level 19, so we'll go I just go flight level 12 because it's not a very long flight, although the jet this jet does like cruising high up, but we'll go 12,000, it'll be high enough for today. Take off. Now then, we're getting near the point where we need to start linking up the PFD with the takeoff speed, so I'm going to get an engine started here. Also, we've been on battery for a while now, so let's remove the guard. Boost, yes, the climate control is set to off. I think of that as bleeds, so they're off a start. We'll put on the beacon light, we'll turn on the passenger lights, and we'll start the engine.
May I have your attention, please?
Start and run's all you need.
Please comply with the illuminated seat belt and no smoking signs.
You'll see ignition appear when we get to 12% N2, so it's not going to start igniting any fuel until then. There we go. So it's basically just all automatic. You don't have to worry about spinning the starter up, letting it get to particular N2. It'll do it for you. You know, it won't introduce fuel ignition at all. It's got enough rotation speed. While that's starting up, let's get our other takeoff parameters in. So we've got 11 degrees on the temperature. QNH, let's shift B here since there's no ATIS. 1004 on that standby altimeter. I don't bother with wind unless it's tailwind, because that's only going to reduce your takeoff length. Hit next. Now, well, before we do that, you notice that when you get to about 52-53% N2, this is now stable, 24% N1 and 50% N2. That engine's now stable. I'm going to start the left engine. Once the ignition's gone out on the left engine, I'll assume that most of the load is off the generator, so I'll then start the PFD. So we can choose whether we want flap 015. Runway here is not that long. We're already using about half of it with flaps. If we take flaps off, it's too long, so we'll go for flaps takeoff. Okay, I'm going to go avionics on. And I'm going to hit send for these V speeds, V rotate 101. And they should appear here, and then they're ready on the speed tape. Okay, so that's essentially most of what we've got to do done. There's not too much really. In terms of tuning, I've said that the it won't fly the arc. We'll fly the arc with the VOR. VOR-1, it's going to auto-tune to the ILS for us because we've told it we're doing an ILS approach, which is another nice feature. So we'll leave that. So we'll go for VOR-2, and we'll set VOR-2 to the Inverness VOR. This is what we have to follow the arc round. That's 109.2. On nav2, and we'll switch to that when we get past Bombay and we're on the sort of approach to the arc. Okay, we'll put our altitude. Let's get our cruising altitude set to 12k. There we go. We'll set Toga now. Toga is normally down here. It's just to move the flight director. It doesn't work there, so there's a click spot here, or as I do, just bind the joystick button for it, and that effectively gives us a 10-degree pitch up on runway heading. Talking of which, let's set runway heading. According to little nav map, the runway heading here is 90. So heading back to 90 degrees, and that's pretty much all we need for takeoff. We will need flaps, so that sounds like a good time to do control checks. So let's get our yoke back. The yoke is working. We'll check outside in a minute. We've got rudder pedals, we've got brakes, they're all working. Let's have a quick look outside. The only other thing, actually, just to remark, the controls are actually really simple here. I mean, we've got throttle, so I've got my little Cytec quadrant, and I have the throttle lever, and then I have what's normally the prop lever bound to the bound to the speed brakes. So this lever here does speed brakes in the air and ground spoilers when you're on the ground. So if we have a look, you shouldn't really need speed brakes normally if you manage your speeds properly, which means you want to be no higher than 200 sort of at the start of your final approach. So if we pull back the speed brakes, you see speed brakes are actually only a single panel here. And then if we go for ground spoilers, those panels all lift up, and you would engage that after landing. But we'll make sure that's shut just now. Yes, just a control surfaces check. Great. Okay. And so, confirming again, speed brakes are stowed. Let's set flaps 15. Okay, we have alt set. The other thing we want to check is our trim over here. I like to have it nicely into the green. I find that works sort of nearly half. There we go. Works really well. Okay, so we're going to take off, follow runway heading, and then make a turn to the south, and then we'll engage nav and flight level change, and we'll climb at 240 knots, or sort of close to that, up to 12k, which we've got preset. And we need to turn the bleeds back on now. We'll turn our taxi light on. That's it. There's not a lot to do now. We've done all the hard work. Let's just get head tracking on for the taxi. Who am I going to knock over? Let's just probably try and go ahead. This thing turns in quite a small turning circle. So you don't normally need to push back with it. Hopefully he'll just duck under the wing. Okay, and where are you going? Because we want to go that way. Thank you. So we're heading off for runway 09. Taxi lights are on, passenger lights are already on. I don't bother with nav lights because it's daytime. We'll turn the strobes on and set the transponder once we get to the runway. And we'll also remember to turn the pitot heat on just before the runway. You don't want to turn it on too far in advance because apparently it can overheat you. Well, that sounds like a bit of a design flaw to me, but there you go. The ground actually slopes downhill here, so I find that essentially once I've got it moving I don't really need much, if any, throttle. So I think hopefully you'll see in this flight, although there was a little bit more faff there, maybe getting the fact that it doesn't follow the DME arc setup. I think you'll see that once we're in the air, the VNAV, the fact that it can follow vertical profile and meet the constraints that you've got on the legs for altitude, is a big win. So I'm just going to slow down here as we're approaching the runway. I'm going to strobes, landing lights, taxi light off, pitot heat on, and TARA, effectively mode C as well for the transponder. 09. No obvious traffic. So rotation speed's 101. Flaps up speed will be 124, that's 10, V2 plus 10. Okay. Final checks, so flaps, trims, levers, and we are good to go. So advancing the power FADEC will ensure that we don't overboost anything. Keep it straight. V1, rotate, gear up. Follow the flight director. 10 degrees, pitch up. Flaps can come up. In fact, we're a bit late on bringing the flaps up. Bringing it back to climb thrust now. Pitching down slightly. Switching to nav mode. Not autopilot on yet, notice, it's just nav, so which means the flight director will tell us where to turn, which is quite nice. So we just need to control our pitch, watching the speed, it's fine, we don't want to go above 240, but we can go up to 240, and then when we engage flight level change mode, be close to what we want. So I'm just going to take us round until we're sort of on a heading towards the magenta line. And then we'll straighten up, because we don't want to overturn these things, and because we just gradually approach the desired track. I'm going to level up now. And I'm going to engage flight level change mode and autopilot. And in fact we're a bit slow on the old speed, so let's get that bumped up to 240. So after takeoff we're on climb thrust, flight level change 240, we're on LNAV, flaps are up, barometer, yeah, well I guess it is, going to standard. I'm going to turn the landing light off now. Once we're stabilised on course here, we'll turn off the passenger signs. See, we're nearly at 12k already. We could have gone a lot higher than that. And we probably should have gone a lot higher than that because the jet likes... In fact, I'm going to assume we're cleared. Requesting 16k. Let's go up to 16. So assume ATC have cleared us as it's still quite quiet in the skies, and that isn't a level that's allowed on this airway, so we'll go up to 16. So a quick look outside. Nice blue sea and sky. nicely in the climb with the Scottish mainland appearing there in front of us. Let's just check everything's still okay. So we're on a flight level change speed of 240. We're climbing very strongly. You notice we're climbing here at 4,000 feet a minute. You wouldn't get that in the SAB. This bar tells us when we're going to reach our next assigned altitude, so that can be useful for ascent or descent. You'll see basically, you know, we won't even have, we'll just be leaving Orkney Islands and we're already at our cruise height. Normally, you know, any sort of significant distance on this, you'd be cruising over 40,000 feet. It's a whole different ball game compared to the turboprops. Let's have a look in the cabin, see if that works. Can we head track in the cabin? No, we can also go out of the cabin as well, which is interesting. But go down slightly. Yes, I'm too low. Okay, now that's better. Yeah, I'm not sure head tracking works too well in that view now. Anyway. Let's not do that anymore. So we're now at our assigned altitude, so we just have to watch our speed now. So I'm just going to bring back the lever into sort of cruise position, which can be anywhere really. I don't think we really need to be going much faster than this, or we're going to get there too soon. Okay, so in terms of descent, because you've got to start thinking ahead with this thing. Essentially, the MSA, you've got to be careful here. The step down altitude, if you notice here, this is saying 4,900, which is in fact the level we're allowed to be at the start of the arc, and it's also the MSA for the approach to Inverness, so that's fine. The figure we want to get to at the end of the whole thing is 2,700 feet for the approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial the target down to 2,700, because when we go to VNAV mode will follow the profile on the legs pages. So we go to legs, you see we haven't got any altitude restrictions, so we get to the 4,900, then we've got 3,000, so it'll basically follow those steps for us, but it won't go below the figure that we set there. And I think in this case it's fair enough to set 2,700, as that's the start of the ILS approach. The other thing we can do is you can look at our minimums and get those programmed in. Let's just check our speed, it's still okay. We're on standard, so we're fine on that. So let's switch back to Navigraph. This is the ILS approach, runway 05. 230 is the minimums. So let's PFD menu. We scroll down to refs. Scroll down to minimums. What was it? 230. Using the inner wheel, we can set the bar minimum to 230. There we go, we have minimum set on there. The other thing we can do is our performance figures for the approach, just to get our ref speed for the approach. We go back to, and we're turning at Wick now. There's the town and there's the airport. Heading down the coast to Inverness, and there's a little bit more cloud down that way. Where were we? Yes, perf for the approach. So we could do with ATIS for Inverness. We haven't got ATIS for Inverness available in the game. We'll use what we are on real weather, so let's hope it's close. We'll go by what little nav map tells us. Little nav map says that Inverness is 13 degrees and Q1004. So 13 degrees, 1004. You know, it knows we're landing on runway 5. Runway, hang on. Yeah, runway's dry. I may have a slope, I don't think it's significant. So we have these, so VREF is 106 and V approach is 113. Send those, and they will then appear also on the speed tape when we are on the final approach. That's it, so we can now relax for a short time. I might have another go at a passenger view. It's probably going to end up badly again. I'm not quite sure why it's moving around like that, because yeah, it's, I can't get the height right. Probably not a lot of point. Not sure why it's drifting. Right, you get a rough idea. So yeah, so once... Oh, we didn't turn off the passenger lights, did we? So once you're in the cruise, yeah, it's not, the only thing you have to do really is keep an eye on the speed, because the one thing this plane doesn't have is any kind of auto throttle, so you're always responsible for controlling the power. So, you know, when you start to descend, whether you're in V speed or VNAV, you need to pull back, otherwise you'll overspeed. And you want to, as I say, you want to be about maximum 200. So 200 is the gear and first stage flap speed. So I always like to be around or just below 200, you know, at the start of the approach, so the initial approach fix. So by the end of the arc, we want to be no more than 200. So what we'll do now is I'm going to engage VNAV mode, and you'll see that the path is armed but not yet. So VAL is the mode, path is armed but not yet set. This kind of magenta circle is showing us the speed, the rate of descent we need to meet our next altitude constraint if we started now. The plane's not going to start yet because it'd be too early. I think it'll normally wait till this is about 2k. Well, you can see, here you go, here's top of descent coming up. It's basing that on our current ground speed and deciding, you know, it tries to go for a 3-degree slope, so essentially that's as simple as that. It'll kind of track your ground speed and give you a 3-degree slope to meet the next altitude constraint. The other thing I should have done is sync the heading. What I might do is get VOR-2 ready for the approach. So let's just go back, have a quick look at the Navigraph chart again. So you can see here that coming in for Bombay, we are on a 160-degree bearing to Inverness, INS, NDB, which is 109.2. So let's get that ready. 160-degree bearing. It means switching the PFD to VOR-2 mode. A little bit of turbulence here, which I don't want to do and upset the nav, so I'm going to go heading mode. Now if I just hit nav, it's going to put me to VOR-1, so it always goes to this next preset. But when I'm in VOR-1, I can change the next preset using this center, just by scrolling the mouse in the center of this data knob. So if I now hit nav again, we'll be on VOR-2. Now VOR-2, we just said we want it to be on a 160 bearing. This is just so we've started our descent. VNAV is now VPath mode. Just going to pull the power back now, as we don't want to overspeed. And we got to remember that we've got to be at 250 by 10,000. So when we get a little bit nearer, we'll start slowing down more. So let's get that course of 160 dialed in, so when we do switch to VOR-2 for the approach to the arc, everything will be ready. Okay, and now we can go back to FMS mode and back to nav mode. Yeah, so now we're just going to watch our speed, because we need to be at 250 knots or lower by the time we get to 10k. And as we're coming up to some clouds, I think we're going to want at least engine anti-ice for a bit. Not sure if we'll be in them long enough to need wing anti-ice, but we'll see. So I'm just going to bring the power back a bit more now to start to slow down towards 250. And so you've got to be careful here. If you don't do it in time, you will need the speed brake. But it always seems wrong to be having to go for the speed brake. And the VNAV B-path will adjust our rate of descent for us as our ground speed comes down, which is really nice. So no more dividing by 3 and multiplying by 5, although it's not hard to do. But when it's on a curved path like this, so going back to the charts, you know, actually if you go back to little nav map for a second. The problem with this approach, and this is where this really wins, is that in terms of calculating your, you know, you've got to be at 4,900 feet, 12 miles from Inverness. You've got to work out distance between there and Bombay. Then you've got to work out this. You've got to add it all up, and it's quite complicated to work out where to start your top of descent manually. Whereas with the VNAV, when we're in. Let's get engine anti-ice on. Okay, we don't want to go any slower than that, so let's just put some power back in. Some interesting clouds around here. I don't think the cloud layer is very big, you can almost see through it already, so I'm not going to worry about wing anti-ice. So I'm happy with that speed for now. So we just need to be below 250. We're coming down to 10k. We'll put the landing lights on when we get 10k. Come up to Chin, which is the waypoint for Bombay, where we start our turn onto the path for the arc. I do miss the ability to, you know, the one thing I really do like with the turboprops, of course, is their control. You know, the speed control is so good on them. With this, you just pretty much have to remember to take the power off early enough. Okay, we're below 10,000, so I'm going to put the landing lights back on, and especially since we're in cloud. I don't know, have we got any ice build up yet? A little bit. I might actually put the full anti-ice on, wing and engine. I'm guessing you don't need the engine only when you've got the wing and engine, but I'm not too sure on that. Hopefully we won't be in this cloud all the way. The other, as I say, the other nice thing this will do is when you're at the end of the arc. So what I'm going to do is go around the arc in VOR-2 mode, switch back to FMS on the final turn, and then just basically hit approach, and the FMS will switch at the appropriate point, at least it should do, from FMS nav to VOR-1 ILS nav. Now, hopefully it will tune the ILS for us. 108, it has 108.5 has been tuned for us. Yeah, there's quite a bit of cloud here. Starting a turn at Bombay in a second, which is going to take us onto the track towards the arc. So once we're stable on that, I'm going to switch to VOR-2, and remember we already set up the course on that 160 degrees. A bit bumpy here in the clouds as well. Hopefully we'll break out and get a nice view of the arc approach. It's one of the biggest arcs you'll do. It's like a 12-mile arc, and it's about 30-40 degrees of arc, so. And you'd never get this, I don't know anyone would ever fly this in real life, you'd always get vectored. I don't know, maybe from the north to this runway 05 you might. Okay, sync the heading mode, switch to heading mode. We're going to get VOR-2 now, this is VOR-1, which is not going to help us much. VOR-2, there we go, I've switched to nav. So we're now on the 160 course, and we're looking for 14 miles from Inverness where we're going to turn onto the arc. We're currently at 19 miles. Just going to bring the power back a bit more. Don't forget we need to be at 4,900. Well, 4,900 or above, essentially, at the start of the arc. So hopefully the VNAV will do its job and keep us above the MSA until we're onto the arc. It's currently at 6,300, and we haven't set our barometer to local, so let's do that. Oh, it's decided that the local pressure is 1013, really? Okay. Ah, interesting. No, it hasn't. It's yeah, sorry. There we go. I hadn't switched. The display hadn't switched. Not quite sure what happened there. 1004 is on the standby, and it's now 1004 on here, so that's okay. 16 miles. Let's be careful here. We want to be in heading mode, and then so let's sync our heading up again. And when we're at 14 miles, we turn right onto the arc, onto the 12 arc. Again, not having to worry about altitude is great. It's just doing it for us. Let's see if anything that's going to level off on this segment, because it doesn't want to go below 4,900. And there's 14 miles, so I'm going to go heading mode, and I'm going to turn right onto the arc. About an 80-degree turn. And we're descending again for the next target, which is 3,500. And you can see that target's changed up here. Just going to bring the power back a bit more, because usually about 45% is good for about 200 knots. I don't really want to be going once when you're level. Now that's 160 to Inverness, so I'm going to bring the course back to 140 and have that as our next crossing point. And don't forget we're meant to be on a 12 DME arc here. So we're going to turn the course by 10 and turn the heading by 10 just to stay on the arc. Just keeping an eye on the speed. Altitude's taking care of itself. Next constraint is, yeah, so it says 3,500 at the end of this segment. So we're just descending gently. Let's wind that power back a bit more. We're going, probably don't want to be going more than about 220 on the arc, really. We've got a crosswind from the right. We're inside the arc at the moment, so let's turn that back to 130, and we'll just turn the heading about 5 for now. Let's try and get the distance back out to about 12.
Altitude.
Just watch that speed as we level off. 120 on the course. Oops. I say we'll stay slightly wide. We're in the soup here, aren't we? I've still got the anti-ice on. Yeah, I'll leave it on, I think. I was hoping we'd have a nice view of the, you know, out to sea and Inverness, but at the moment it's just cloud. We don't have to worry about turning until we get to 64 degrees bearing to Inverness, and we're currently at 120, going for 110, so we've got a bit to go yet. We are drifting out again now, so we just start to turn our heading a bit more in. Now we're descending to 2,700, which is our final descent speed. We want to be at 2,700 at the start of the ILS approach. Just to that power back a bit more. I want to get nearer 200 now as we're coming towards the end of the arc. Sorry, my keyboard bindings for heading is next to the keyboard binding for the outside view. Yeah, coming out to 12 now, 11.8. 11.9 on the distance, so, and it is opening up. Ooh, nice. The airport is over there. Inverness is over here. 90 degrees. Oops, keep doing that, sorry. Exactly on the 12 DME arc now, and the only thing we need now is our turning point of 64 degrees. So when the VOR course is 64, we cross that bearing, we need to turn in. Speed's dropping a fair bit now, so let's just stabilise that. 190 is a fine sort of speed to be doing. .80 now. Let's try not to do that again. So the airport's just over here, I think. And in fact, no, we're not quite. 64. So that's 80 degrees we're crossing now. .70 degrees will be the next crossing radial. It is pretty low cloud now, but I think we'll be okay for minimums, hopefully. After we've crossed 70 degrees, we put in 64 as the next target. Speed's fine. No more descent to do now except the final descent. We'll go for 64 degrees now. And when we cross 64, we'll turn into a 54 degree bearing. Turn our heading to 54 degrees and we'll go back to FMS mode. Just watch our speed doesn't creep over 200. There we go. I'm going to turn in now to 54 degrees. I'm going to go back to FMS. I'm going to switch nav back on. So the FMS takes over. You'll see the FMS is showing us the ILS superimposed as a ghost needle. Switch head tracking back on. That's in fact pretty good, I think. So I think it's time to arm approach mode. There's the runway. Approach is armed. We're waiting now for, hopefully, for glide slope capture. Oh, and it's a lovely view coming into Inverness here with the clouds and the sun coming through. Just watch that diamond now because we want to be ready on, we're close to 200 here, we don't want to go over 200 because that's our flap limiting speed. So I'm going to drop the gear now and first notch of flaps. Maybe let's bring the power back to about 40%. We want to make sure that we get below the 160, which is the flap 35 speed. We've got our landing lights on. We can turn off wing anti-ice now. Landing lights are on. Gear is down. Minimums, reference speed should appear as we get nearer it. 7 miles out now. We're on glide slope. We're on the localizer. So we're below the flap 35 speed now. I'll just let it get a little bit lower down, maybe 1500 feet, and then we'll go flap 35. Don't want to slow down too quickly, but on the other hand, we want to give ourselves a Keswick bridge with the A9 heading north. We don't want to not have enough time to slow down either. Flap 35 adds quite a lot of drag, so it will slow us down a fair bit. Let's go for that now. Let's go to 1500. Okay, flap 35 is selected. And you'll see our approach speed appearing now on the tape as well, about 115, I think it was 113. Now just keep an eye on the speed. We want it down to the, obviously, the approach speed before we reach the threshold. Coming near it now, so I'm just going to give us a little bit more power just to stabilise on that approach speed. So maybe up to about 45–50%. I say there is quite a lot of drag with the flat 15. Maybe went a little bit under the approach speed there. Don't want to do that. Okay, I think we're nice and stable now. Just 1,000 feet. We seem to be maintaining the approach speed. So shortly disconnect the autopilot. I've got a button bound to disconnect autopilot and yaw damper. Did basically two actions on the same joystick button, so I'm going to do that now. Just got to bring her in now. I do find that I have tendency to land this thing long. Essentially, you can reduce the power to idle at the threshold, and no later than that, otherwise you will land long.
500.
Just pulling the power back as we need, as we've got just the one red light. Start looking at the continue. Just going to start looking at the end of the runway now, and I am pulling the power right back. Don't really want to flare too much, just sort of let it settle. And then full speed brake and braking. I don't think we're quite going to make that turn off, so we'll just do a slight turn round here. Close, but not quite. We'll clean up now, bring the flaps up, turn off the pitos. We'll leave the landing and strobe lights on, as technically this is a runway. Let's get the trim back to neutral position. Flaps are up. Turn climate control off now. So yeah, so maybe a little bit more FMS setup initially compared to flying something like the Saab or the King Air, but the VNAV is so nice. I didn't set the mist up properly, but the VNAV is so nice. Not having to worry about altitude, especially when you're doing something like the DME arc where there's lots of other work to do. It just takes a lot of load off. Let's now get taxi lights on, landing lights off, strobe off, transponder can come back to standby if I can find the button. Thank you. I managed to come to a complete stop. I'm not going to bother parking at the main terminal, I'm going to pull in on this apron here and just turn around facing the terminal. And it stayed nice and dry at least, although we had more clouds than I was expecting there towards the end really. So I'm just going to point us towards the terminal and come to a stop here. There we go. So parking brake on. Let's turn avionics off. Passenger signs, which should have been on. I always forget about passengers. Should have obviously been on before we started the descent. They can come off. Engines can stop now. Avionics should have been off, not on dispatch mode. There we go. We'll just get the sort of low pressure warnings as the engines spool down. We can turn off the standby display, and I think that's pretty much engine stopped. So I'm gonna turn everything else off. So have a quick look outside. So here we are in Inverness. So I hope you enjoyed the flight, and yeah, I say this aircraft with its systems, its versatility really, with the systems, the FMS is really good. It's very versatile. It can land and take off on relatively short runways. You know, it really likes longer flights at higher altitudes. It'll just burn more fuel if you go lower down, but it's very, you know, very flexible aircraft, and with the working title mods it really is good fun to fly. And I say, don't be put off by the sort of jet cockpit side of it, because essentially the controls are very simple and the FMS is not too bad and the displays are decent, and that's it. And there's not a lot else to worry about really. The autopilot obviously works really well. VNAV works brilliantly. So anyway, yeah, hopefully I'll do some more flights and maybe go somewhere a bit different in the CJ4. So until then, I'll say goodbye for now. See you next time.